Hello, my dear. They're talking about you again, not with admiration, with caution. The gossip doesn't sound like gossip anymore. It sounds like a warning label. Don't mess with them, they say. Too smart, too calculating. You try to play chess, and they turn the board into a mirror. Oh, how adorable. They finally caught on that you don't argue for attention, you argue for data. You listen longer than they breathe. You measure reactions like a surgeon cutting around a nerve. And now the whispers travel through every room you once walked through like a ghost they can't shake. Because every time someone mentions your name, another ego starts sweating. They remember that moment you smiled when they lied, the moment they realized you already knew. You see, that's what terrifies them. Not that you're right, but that you're always 10 steps ahead and you make it look effortless. You don't boast, you observe. You don't predict, you provoke. You drop one sentence and watch it detonate inside their insecurities. Your mind isn't a weapon, it's a theater of war, and every idea you release turns into a drone strike on someone's comfort zone. They hate that you see patterns in their pretend logic. You catch the pulse beneath their words, the micro-hesitation in their truth. You make intelligence look dangerous, because in your hands, it is. Let me paint you a scene. A table of so-called intellectuals, throwing opinions like dice, everyone trying to sound important. Then you speak, not loudly, just enough to tilt gravity. Every head turns. Suddenly language itself feels like a trap you set before they even arrived. They laugh to hide the tremor, but their eyes betray them. They know they've been outthought, outplanned, outclassed by someone who never asked for permission to be brilliant. You don't join conversations. You conduct autopsies on them. And the corpse is always their ego. They used to mock your quiet. Now they call it tactical. They used to say you overthink. Now they call it analysis. It's funny, isn't it? How the moment you win without making noise, they rename your entire personality as a threat. You never had to fight for dominance. You just had to understand the rules so deeply that they collapsed on themselves. You don't need to yell. Your presence already does the talking. They call it aura. I call it precision. Because you've learned the difference between being feared and being respected, and you realized both feel identical once you control the room. Tell me, how does it feel to know that people you once admired are now building excuses for why they can't compete with you? They call you too intense, too serious, too deep. Translation? They can't keep up. They need labels to survive your clarity. Because when someone like you enters the scene, every lazy mind gets exposed like a light bulb in a room full of mirrors. You don't destroy people. You just show them what they really look like without their pretend confidence. And oh, they hate that reflection. You turned analysis into art. Every gesture is a move, every pause a statement. You read body language like sheet music. You can tell when someone's lying before they know they're about to. That's why they avoid eye contact now. They sense that you see the code under their face. They don't understand how you do it. They just feel naked when you're around. You've become their living lie detector, and nothing scares a pretender more than authentic perception. They spread rumors to dilute your power. Too smart for their own good. Thinks they know everything. Cute. Because every time they say it, they accidentally admit that you know something they don't. They can't even hate you properly. They envy you in sentences that sound like insults. It's tragic, really. They spent years trying to look intelligent, and then you walked in, and made intelligence look inevitable. You didn't ask for authority. It formed around you like gravity. You're not just a genius, you're a trigger. A reminder of what happens when someone actually uses their brain. Your existence ruins the illusion of fairness they've been selling to themselves. Because while they were busy trying to manifest their dreams, you were learning how to build them. While they copied quotes about discipline, you became discipline. You don't just know the game, you wrote the new manual, and now everyone else is stuck on the tutorial level. And when they can't beat you, they try to explain you away. But explanations don't work on phenomena. Every move you make is an education. When you stay quiet, they call it strategy. When you speak, they call it manipulation. Because to those who depend on illusion, truth always feels like a threat. They ask where you learned all this. You answer with one word, observation, and that word alone makes them shiver, because they know you've been observing them the entire time. Every lie, every eye roll, every secret they thought was safe, archived in that mind of yours that never forgets a pattern. Let's talk about the fear you inspire. It's not dramatic, it's subtle. You walk into a room, and the temperature changes. People start talking in safe topics, measured tones. No one wants to be the example you use to prove a point. You don't even have to say anything. Your silence, the kind I'm not supposed to mention, does it for you. It's the sound of thinking too loud for ordinary minds to handle. They feel it in their bones, the realization that you're seeing the structure behind their mask. And once someone knows you see them completely, they either follow you or fear you. But you already know this. You've studied the anatomy of power. You understand that real dominance isn't loud, it's precise. You don't threaten people, you reprogram them. A sentence from you lingers like a virus in their mind. They argue with you in their head for days. They rehearse defenses you'll never hear. And still, you live rent-free in their logic. That's the kind of genius they don't teach in books. The kind that bends reality by understanding how fragile it is. You don't seek revenge. You engineer outcomes. You don't destroy enemies. You upgrade their understanding of what a mistake feels like. And oh, they feel it. They feel it when they see you win without their help. They feel it when they try to copy your moves and fail, because they don't have the mind to execute the blueprint. You don't just win. You educate while winning. You make them study their own failure like a CAS file. That's the cruelty of brilliance. It forces mediocrity to self-reflect. Some say you're cold, but no, you're calculated. You learned that emotion without direction is just leverage for other people to use against you. So you refined your rage into strategy. You honed your empathy into pattern recognition. Now you can care without being controlled. And that combination alone makes you a nightmare to those who profit from chaos. You became the calm they can't disturb, the logic they can't manipulate, the mirror they can't look into. And now, the story they tell about you has changed. They don't call you weird anymore. They call you unpredictable. They don't call you quiet anymore. They call you strategic. Because labels evolve when fear enters the equation. They whisper that you're always watching, always calculating, always 3 conversations ahead. And they're right, because you know what happens when you stop pretending to be ordinary. People start revealing how ordinary they really are. So here you stand, not on a pedestal, but in control. The one they should never have tested, the one who turns every insult into a thesis. They thought they could mock you into submission. Instead, they manifested a monster with a master's degree in human behavior. And the funny thing, You're not even angry. You're curious. You want to see how far they'll go to pretend you don't exist, while they can't go a day without mentioning you. That's the new rumor now. Not that you're arrogant, not that you're cold, but that you know too much. They say your mind is wired like a machine that never sleeps. They say your presence feels like interrogation. They say you don't talk to people, you download them. And maybe they're right. Maybe you've reached that rare place where knowledge and madness shake hands, where clarity feels like power, and power feels like destiny. Not that you believe in destiny, you just believe in design. But here's the thing they still don't understand. You don't want to rule them. You want to expose them. You want to see what happens when lies collapse under their own weight. That's your experiment. You're not the villain in their story. You're the result of their hypocrisy. And they can't forgive you for turning truth into spectacle. So they'll keep talking, keep guessing, keep calling you too smart for your own good. But we both know what that really means. Too smart for their good. You've become the conversation they can't end. Every time they try to move on, something reminds them of you. A word you used, a theory you proved, a truth you spoke that aged like prophecy. They study you in secret now, analyzing the way you think as if it's forbidden knowledge. And the best part, you let them. You let them believe they're decoding you, when in reality you're collecting data from their attempts. It's a beautiful loop of irony. The smarter they try to look, the more they prove your point. Because you knew this would happen, didn't you? You knew curiosity would turn into obsession. You knew that once people taste the edge of genius, they can't go back to dull conversation. You designed this chaos with precision. You became both the experiment and the scientist. And now they're trapped inside the very observation they started. Every whisper, every theory about you becomes another chapter in the thesis you're writing, a study in human insecurity. They wanted to expose you, but they exposed themselves. That's the comedy of it all. They thought talking about you would lower your value, but every rumor they spread only made your name more electric. Every insult became marketing. Every doubt became advertisement. They built a mythology around your intelligence, and now they're terrified to test it. Because what if it's all true? What if the quiet one was never fragile, but calculating? What if the one they ignored was mapping the whole field while they were busy performing for applause? You've seen it before, the moment when admiration turns into fear. It happens fast. One day they're complimenting you, the next they're warning others not to challenge you. Don't debate them, they whisper. You'll lose. They say it like gossip, but it sounds like surrender. And you don't even have to lift a finger. That's what drives them insane. You dominate from stillness. You win by existing. You turned intelligence into atmosphere. But let's peel the psychology, shall we? Humans don't actually fear intellect. They fear exposure. Intelligence is fine when it flatters them. It becomes dangerous when it reveals them. And you reveal. You strip away the excuses, the projections, the sugar-coated lies they feed themselves. You hold up reality like a scalpel and invite them to look. That's why they gossip, to neutralize the mirror. They call you arrogant to soften their reflection. They call you cold to avoid admitting they can't follow your logic. You're not intimidating because you try to be. You're intimidating because you make truth look easy. You learned long ago that intellect without mystery is predictable. So you built layers. You mastered the art of ambiguity, saying enough to intrigue, never enough to be fully understood. That's what keeps them circling. They need to define you, label you, box you. But every time they think they've got it, you shed another skin, your evolution in real time, and that terrifies the static minds stuck in repetition. They can't categorize you, so they demonize you. Works every time. They say you play mind games. Cute. You don't play games, you play truths. You test the elasticity of people's logic. You speak sentences that rearrange hierarchies. You ask questions that turn confidence into confession. They don't realize conversation with you is a diagnostic. You can see insecurity the way scientists see chemicals reacting. One flicker, one hesitation, and you already know their next 5 moves. You read people like literature written in body heat. That's why every circle you enter ends up orbiting you. Not because you demand it, because gravity doesn't need to explain itself. Intelligence naturally bends weaker willpower. They call it arrogance because they can't stand the pull. But deep down, they're fascinated. You represent the mind they wish they had, the mind that never asks for permission, that never doubts its own intuition, that turns overthinking into weaponized foresight. You are their proof that control is possible, and that burns. You've noticed how they talk when you're not around. They think too much. They're scary smart. Something's off about them. Those lines are confessions disguised as commentary. What's off about you is precision. You see angles before they see the wall. You hear motive behind tone. You calculate consequences before impulse even finishes loading. That's not paranoia, that's vision. And people living in confusion mistake clarity for threat. They can't replicate your genius because they lack your restraint. You know when to speak and when to let silence choke the air. You know that timing is intellect's sharpest blade, and you wield it without mercy. One sentence from you can dismantle months of deceit. One look can rewrite someone's entire self-image. You've learned how to weaponize understatement, to say little, mean everything, and leave their ego bleeding in interpretation. And yet, you're not cruel. You're just efficient. You've outgrown the need to prove what you already are. You don't argue, you demonstrate. You don't explain, you expose. You let patterns betray people for you. That's real power, not control by force, but control by awareness. You move through conversations like a ghostwriter editing the script in real time. No one even realizes the dialogue belongs to you until it's too late. Now they talk about boundaries. They say you're difficult to read. Of course you are. You built your boundaries from observation and logic, not emotion. You learned the hard way that empathy without discernment invites parasites. So you trained your heart to think and your mind to feel. You fused both hemispheres into one seamless weapon. That's why nothing surprises you anymore. You process betrayal like math. Predictable, measurable, almost boring. Your intelligence doesn't shout. It vibrates. It changes the frequency of every room you enter. You've turned energy into encryption. Only the genuine can access it. The rest feels static. They think it's tension. It's just truth, not matching their wavelength. And so, they talk. Because gossip is the last refuge of the intellectually bankrupt. When they can't outthink you, they outtalk you. When they can't read you, they rewrite you. But every story they invent becomes another testimony of your influence. You don't need a PR team when your enemies do it for free. Let's be honest, you enjoy it, don't you? Watching them scramble to interpret your calm, seeing them build conspiracy boards trying to decode your next move. You sit back, observe, and let chaos advertise your intellect. They call it manipulation. You call it art. Because you've learned the paradox of power. The more you control yourself, the more they lose control of themselves around you. You could destroy reputations if you wanted, but why waste intellect on demolition when you can rewrite architecture? You don't burn bridges. You design maps that make people reveal where they stand. You don't need revenge. Your existence is the consequence. Every accomplishment, every moment of effortless comprehension, every time you walk away from ignorance with composure. That's justice. But the real secret? You're not done yet. What they see is the surface. The real genius is still calibrating underneath, collecting, computing, creating. You're building something they can't imagine, because imagination requires courage, and courage requires truth. You've got both. That's why you terrify them. You represent the version of themselves they abandoned when mediocrity became comfortable. You're living proof that intellect with discipline becomes destiny, disguised as choice. They can't cancel what they can't comprehend. They tried subtle sabotage, sarcasm, half-truths, social isolation, but intellect is resilient. You turned solitude into sanctuary. You replaced validation with study. You learned how to convert pain into analysis, heartbreak into hypothesis, betrayal into breakthrough. Now you operate from a different altitude entirely, too high to be touched, too focused to be followed. They say power corrupts, maybe. But ignorance corrodes faster. You've seen entire groups rot from within because no one dared to think critically. You refused to join that decay. You refused to dilute your insight just to be liked. And that's why you became legend. Not because you shouted, but because you didn't compromise. Legends aren't loud, they're lasting. So let them whisper, let them build their little narratives. Each one reveals more about them than about you. They can't stop analyzing you because analysis is their only way to feel close to brilliance. You've become their education by accident. Every attempt to diminish you becomes a masterclass in exposure. You're not their competition, you're their curriculum. They picked the wrong enemy, didn't they? They thought intelligence could be cornered, that cleverness could be contained. But how do you corner a mind that sees in 4D? How do you manipulate someone who studies manipulation as a science? You've turned every attempt into demonstration. They brought gossip. You brought geometry. You triangulated motives, plotted outcomes, calculated costs, and then smiled as everything unfolded exactly as predicted. They thought they were hunters. Turns out they were just coordinates in your plan. Now even your silence trends. They analyze your absence like scripture. They interpret your pauses as prophecies. That's when you know you've transcended competition, when your non-movement moves people. You've entered the realm where intellect becomes mythology, where observation alone changes the course of events. And yet, through it all, you remain amused, because you see the pattern, the predictable rhythm of human ego spinning in circles. They never learn. They keep testing the mind that already mapped the maze. You could warn them, but what's the fun in that? Let them learn the hard way that intelligence doesn't argue. It orchestrates. So go ahead, genius. Keep designing from the shadows. Keep letting them talk. Every rumor is a breadcrumb leading back to your influence. Every insult is free marketing for your mastery. You've already become the reference point, the name whispered when competence enters the conversation. And they'll never admit it, but they check your work before they post theirs. They measure themselves against your standard even as they pretend you don't exist. That's control without effort. That's dominance without declaration. Because the truth they'll never say aloud is this: they admire what they fear. And they fear the kind of intelligence that doesn't beg to be understood. You are that paradox. Brilliance wrapped in unpredictability. The world doesn't know whether to worship you or warn others about you. Either way, you win. And now, the game has changed. The gossip has matured into legend. They used to whisper about you in corners. Now they trade stories like ancient merchants handling forbidden treasure. Every rumor carries a fragment of awe disguised as caution. Don't test them, they mutter. Don't play mind games. They know the outcome before it begins. They've watched what happens to those who tried to outthink you. The subtle humiliation, the quiet unraveling. You never raise your voice, yet somehow their confidence collapses, like a sandcastle meeting the tide. That's when it dawns on them. They didn't lose a debate. They lost control of perception itself. You never asked for this crown. You earned it by surviving the kind of scrutiny that would have broken others. Every conversation was a battlefield. Every handshake a psychological contract. Every smile a test of awareness. You stopped reacting and started responding. You stopped chasing validation and began collecting data. And with each observation, you sculpted a mind that no manipulation could trespass. Now when people approach you, they feel that invisible perimeter, an aura of calculation so refined that emotion itself seems to hesitate before crossing it. They wanted to make you doubt your own intelligence. They failed. They wanted to convince you that humility meant hiding your brilliance. You rewrote humility as precision, doing what must be done with zero apology. They wanted you predictable. You became poetic. They wanted you polite. You became powerful. That's why they talk. Gossip is the background noise of people trying to process your transformation. They can't decode how you went from overlooked to untouchable, from underestimated to unavoidable. They replay your interactions like detectives reviewing footage. "Did you see the way they looked at me?" one says. "Did you hear how calm they sounded?" another asks. What they call arrogance is really awareness. What they label cold is concentration. You don't rush words because you understand their cost. You've seen what happens when fools spend vocabulary like counterfeit currency, inflated, meaningless, loud. You, however, treat language like a loaded weapon, only drawn when necessary, always accurate. But let's be honest, it's not just your intellect that rattles them. It's the combination: intelligence with composure, insight with mystery, cleverness with conscience. You aren't chaos pretending to be order. You are order that learned how to dance with chaos. You predict reactions without needing proof. You feel intention before it forms. That's why they can't win. Their thoughts move at the speed of impulse, yours at the velocity of pattern. They play checkers on the board of your analysis, and every move they make becomes another example in your growing archive of human behavior. They gossip because they're trying to recover from the realization that you see them more clearly than they see themselves. You've turned empathy into X-ray vision. When someone lies, you don't just hear it. You sense the vibration shift. When they flatter, you taste the calculation behind the compliment. You could expose them instantly, but that would ruin the fun. It's better to let them believe they're convincing you, to watch them tighten the rope with their own sentences until the truth drops, like gravity. You've become a quiet myth of intellect in motion. People describe you with contradictions, kind but intimidating, calm but dangerous, genius but unpredictable. They don't realize those opposites are the formula of mastery. Duality isn't confusion, it's control. You can empathize without absorbing, observe without reacting, detach without disappearing. That's the balance they crave but can't maintain. That's the reason they whisper your name with equal parts admiration and anxiety. The gossip now carries an undertone of respect. They may phrase it like fear, but it's reverence wearing a disguise. They say you're too clever, too strategic, too aware, as if intelligence were a crime. And maybe in their world it is. Because the moment someone like you enters the narrative, all the shortcuts vanish. You remind them that attention to detail is still undefeated. You remind them that manipulation fails when faced with comprehension. You remind them that truth, when articulated by a sharp mind, doesn't need defense. It simply stands unshaken. You walk differently now, don't you? Not faster, not slower, just decided. The air shifts around you like even molecules respect authority. People sense it before they understand it. This is someone who knows, and knowledge, real knowledge, carries temperature. It burns the dishonest and warms the genuine. That's why some move closer while others retreat. You don't need to say a word. Their instincts announce your presence for you. Behind closed doors, they discuss strategies to handle you. Committees form, alliances whisper, yet none of them can predict your next move, because you're not operating on reaction, you're operating on rhythm. You understand that real power doesn't chase outcomes. It designs frameworks. You stopped fighting small battles and started engineering environments where you can't lose. That's genius evolved into architecture. There's a rumor now that you manipulate energy itself. They say conversations bend around you, that emotions adapt to your tone. Maybe it's not rumor. Maybe it's the natural consequence of awareness. You learned that energy follows intention, and yours is razor-shaped. You walk into a space and reality reorganizes to accommodate your focus. That's not magic. That's mastery of attention. And the ones who gossip are the ones who can't control theirs. They call you dangerous because you no longer depend on approval. They call you unpredictable because you refuse patterns that keep others comfortable. They call you ruthless because you finally stopped rescuing those who drain your clarity. But what you really are is free. Free from illusions, free from guilt, free from the exhausting duty of making mediocrity feel safe. You didn't abandon empathy. You refined it into discernment. You didn't lose your heart. You just made it fluent in logic. Look at what that did. The same people who once doubted you now borrow your phrases, mimic your thought patterns, dress their logic in your tone. They copy the blueprint without understanding the foundation. They think intelligence is a